Poddin My Noggin, hosted by CK Sims, creating a platform to elevate, educate, and heal by creating a space where people can share their stories of struggle, triumph, and redemption. CKS Media.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Poddin My Noggin. I'm your host, CK Sims, and we're joined by, and I didn't check before the show started, so I'm going to take a stab at the name. So it's Paolo Gaudiano.
Very good.
Very good, am I right?
Very good, very good.
Perfect. All right, so he is the author of Measuring Inclusion, Higher Profits, and Happier People Without Guesswork or Backlash. It's actually one of my favorite business book reads, if I'll be honest with you. So a couple of parts I read a few times. And I think that the book is really interesting because I think we're in a time right now where this is even more relevant than ever to have these conversations and to take a look at what this book is trying to say. So welcome to the show, Paolo. Thank you for the book and the signed copy, y'all. I'm very lucky. It's going to live up here once we're done our interview for the remainder of the year. So let's just unpack that topic, the title. Okay, so measuring inclusion. So I love the end of the book when you told your little anecdote about how much of a struggle it was to come up with the title of this book, and you having a scientific background, wanting to really stay true to what the book was about. So measuring inclusion, higher profits and happier people without guesswork or backlash. So tell me, how did you end up there for that particular title?
No, thank you. That's a really good question. And thank you again for inviting me to speak. This is really a great opportunity. And the way that the title came out was actually two very separate parts. The main title itself, I was speaking to a publisher and we were talking about the book idea. It ended up not being the publisher that I worked with, but I had ideas like, the inclusion advantage and the inclusion this and inclusion that. And then finally said, well, you do a lot of public speaking, right? And I said, yes. And I said, well, what do people pay to hear you talk about? And I said, well, they usually pay me to talk about measuring inclusion. I said, great, there's your title right there. And I was a little bit on the fence because I felt, especially, I used those bars that kind of are giving a sense of growth on the cover. So the first impression may be a bit geeky. Somebody may look at that title and think, oh, this is really a very quantitative book, which in some way it is. But really, the subtitle was where I spent a lot of time with my current publisher, Practical Inspiration, where I really wanted to make sure that I hit on those 4 points. So the first one is higher profits. And I put that first and foremost because when I came into the space, I realized that what was really needed was an approach that, while appreciating the value of the human side of DEI, of making people feel welcome and included and societal rights, ultimately, what I believe is that until such time that we can find an economic argument to convince leaders for why they should do it, it's going to be a lost cause. And we're seeing that right now. So higher profits and happier people, I purposefully wanted to point out that the two are tied, but that you should care about the first one first. You have to make sure that you can show the link to the higher profits instead of what a lot of people would do, which is to argue about, happiness and psychological safety and inclusion and all these other things. The guesswork and the backlash, the guesswork was meant to say, this is not just about, hey, let's try something, throw it against the wall and see if it sticks. It's about using a quantitative approach that can actually measure impact, that can actually measure what you're doing so that you're not having to guess, but you can actually estimate what's going to be your ROI. And then the backlash was crucial to me because even before I started writing the book, I could see that the backlash was coming. And I knew that there was going to be, I didn't realize honestly how bad the backlash was going to be. And I didn't realize that it was going to coincide with a political movement, which I believe is actually using DI as a weapon to drive a wedge between groups of people. Yes. And unfortunately, that's made it much worse. But I knew the backlash was coming. In the introduction of the book, I talk about an article that I wrote in 2018 in which I made an eerily accurate prediction about what the backlash would be due to and the fact that it would come. And so I wanted to face that head on. I wanted to say, look, if you read what I have to talk about, you will learn how you can do all these things and avoid all this backlash. And so I was very proud of the subtitle. I worked very closely, as I said, with my current publisher. Allison Jones was phenomenal. She really helped me to tease that out. And I felt very good. I felt like the subtitle is definitely the strong part of that.
Well, I would have to agree with you, right? So measuring inclusion, it is exactly what you are doing in this book. So that's bang on. But if it was just measuring inclusion with nothing else, it wouldn't be as sort of catchy, like in the sense it wouldn't bring you in to be more interested. So higher profits and happier people. See, to me, that has just been a no-brainer for a really long time for all the reasons that you do list in this book, and there's more that you list in here. I took a lot away from this book as well. Um, the guesswork or backlash, that's very prevalent, right? Because I think that there's a lot of organizations, and I've worked at many of them, who take this sort of asinine approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, what I really enjoyed about this book actually was that you kind of push back against that and say, okay, like, take a moment, pause, like, what you're doing seems to be noble, but you're doing it in this like haphazard way that's just not working, or it's falling apart, or you're missing the mark. One of the things that I loved was I feel like in this book, and I made notes. So if you see me looking over here, I made notes, which is interesting because typically I don't make notes before I have a interview with someone, but I wanted to talk about certain things that I really liked about this book. So you redefine inclusion in this, right?
Right.
Not as a feeling, which is what I think a lot of people believe it is, feeling included, but as a pattern of access. And so, can you tell me about that? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, and I mean, starting with the general comment that you made. So in the book, I could have easily stopped after about 6 chapters and expanded on that, but I had those 2 chapters where, in one of them, I kind of take out a big stick against my own people in DEI and say, here's a bunch of really stupid things. You know, I like use the term asinine. I try to be a little bit more subtle than that, but that's basically what I tell people is that we made some really dumb mistakes. And then the following chapters is, but by the way, the people that fight against DEI are also making some kind of asinine mistakes. One of the big mistakes that I see people making on the DEI side is to conflate individual feelings, individual experiences, workplace culture. So people will talk about, oh, does this company have an inclusive culture? Or, well, what does that mean? Well, that means that everybody feels included. And what I try to point out to people is that some things like the feelings of inclusion are the result of things that happen to you in the workplace. So if I
Mm-hmm.
want to get to the root of the problem and I want to quantify it, I don't want to know how included you feel. I need to understand what has happened to you that makes you feel that way. And so when I define inclusion, I'm very careful to say, I'm going to focus on defining diversity, equity, and inclusion from the point of view of the organization. And because I'm a scientist and I prove in my book the fact that there are these causal links, what I say is inclusion is what you do, diversity is what you get. And then I also talk about the fact that equity is what you want. And to me, that's very important because what I mean by that is as an organization, if you are allowing anything to happen to your people that causes some people to be unable to perform at their peak for whatever reason that has nothing to do with their work, then you're literally shooting yourself in the foot. And so that's what I try to do is I try to make sure that people understand that it's really less about how people feel, which yes, of course, it's something that I care about. But to me, it's more important to understand why people feel the way that they do. And so, yes, you caught on to that. That's something that matters a lot to me. And I'm very glad that you spotted that because I think that's a crucial aspect is to understand that we need to start being very careful when we define these terms. What is the context in which we define them?
Yeah, what I think had my wheels turning was in this. This was one of the things that I really just sort of took away, like, and it made me think. Right, so if somebody can make me stop and ponder a little bit, then you've won with me. So I do believe that I think for me and for a lot of other people that inclusion was about feeling. And while it may still have feeling attached to it, all of those things, I think how you frame the access part, it's not how, and I'm trying to break this down too in a sense so that I can articulate it and people at home can understand it without question. It is not about how I feel when I show up to work. It is about the systems and patterns that my work has in place that is inclusive. So do I have the same access to mentorship as any other person in my grouping or my organization? Do I have the same access to being invited to critical meetings or strategical meetings? And that is how you quantify inclusion, is the access. And so
Yeah.
if you have a subset of people who just never get invites or any offers for mentorship or any of those particular things, then you have now, as an organization, created a barrier to access. So you're not going to nail your inclusion.
Yeah. Yeah, and there is a very interesting point there, which is that so access appears in the book kind of at two different levels. At the level that you described, I would say, but also, we talk about these 8 categories of inclusion or categories of experiences, and access is one of the categories. And what do I mean by that? Well, we try to think, instead of bucketing people based on their identity traits, let's bucket experiences that people have in the workplace, and let's find out whether, in fact, certain experiences are more likely to happen to one group than to another group. And what we found is that by doing that, we can bucket these experiences in terms of things like compensation and benefits and recognition for your work. One of them is access and participation, and that's a very important one. What was interesting is that even though access and participation is the category of things kind of like the ones that you were describing, I didn't get invited to a meeting in which people were making decisions about me. I did not get the opportunity to participate in a training session. Or it could even be things like, I have a disability and I'm not able to use certain software that they're using at work. That category, even though it happens a fair amount, it turns out it's not the most prevalent one. And what's very interesting is that sometimes things happen to people that they don't realize that they're being excluded, in the sense that they don't realize that there is a pattern that is impacting only certain people based on identity. And yet, the reality when you look at the data is that there are, in fact, forms of exclusion within the organization. An example might be, I gave my laptop to the IT department to fix it, and it's taken them 3 weeks and I still don't have it back. Now, is that a form of exclusion? No, from the typical traditional way of exclusion. But if you think about it from the point of the company, and you find out that 100 people complain about that, and 80 of them happen to be women or members of the LGBTQI plus community or people of color, then you know that the company is not being inclusive. And conversely, sometimes I've heard people complain about the fact that, I was not invited to this offsite because I'm a woman or because I'm Black. And then you realize that actually the reason why that happened is because it was only for certain levels of people that have been there long enough. And it turns out that all kinds of people complained about it. And it was not just women, not just Black people, not just LGBTQ. So we try to be and that's another reason why we want to be very, very careful about distinguishing between what the data tells us that companies are doing that are indicative of a poor level of inclusion versus what happens that actually makes people feel more or less included at the individual level. The latter is what most companies measure. Most companies, when they say they measure inclusion, they measure feelings of individuals, and they ask them questions like, how included do you feel? Do you feel this is an inclusive organization? And as I talk about in another part of the book, I think that that's kind of it's a bit of a silly question to ask, because you're asking about the symptoms instead of trying to understand the causes of those symptoms.
Well, yeah, because I think you mentioned in here about pulse checks, culture checks, and surveys, right? Which are redundant because they just come out every quarter. You're looking to see if the needle has been moved, but like you said, you're looking at the symptom as opposed to the cause of why this happens.
Exactly.
So, like, for an organization who does these sort of things, right? They do the pulse checks and the surveys, and they're trying to measure inclusivity and all of that sort of thing. But a lot of these organizations don't know what to do when they measure that.
Correct.
What would you suggest for anybody who may be listening that's in business as a right course correct, for organizations like that?
So, it's funny. I was literally just on a call with an organization a couple hours ago where they were talking about the fact that they do engagement surveys or pulse surveys. Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening almost universally is that you collect the data, and then a bunch of people from HR or the management will look at the data and say, okay, well, this group is less satisfied than that group. And then you have to decide, what do you do? And I've seen two courses of action when you start that way. One is you just get people in the room and you say, oh, well, let's come up with an initiative. We think it's because of this. Let's do an initiative that hopefully will address that. But you're really kind of operating blind. Or I've seen a few people that will say like, oh, let's do a focus group or let's do interviews with a few people, which is also kind of, it's a very fraught approach because first of all, people don't necessarily know. Like you ask people, if I said, oh, we ask people, what can we do to improve the situation? Well, if you're an employee of an organization of 10,000 people, you may have your experiences, but you really have no idea, no qualification to tell the company how to fix the problems. So what I recommend to people is, again, think about cause and effect. Don't ask about how you feel. Ask about the specific workplace experiences that have interfered with your ability to do your work. And so I don't want to know that you feel excluded. I want to know that your manager continuously forgets to invite you into a meeting. I don't want to know that you feel that you're not recognized. I want you to know the stories of when you gave a presentation and your manager took the credit for it, right? Because if I understand what is actually happening and I see repeated patterns, I can recommend specific actions. For example, one problem that we see a lot is how meetings are organized in two ways. First, who gets invited. Very often we hear people say, I was supposed to be included in this meeting. There were decisions made that impacted me and I was not invited. Lo and behold, that tends to happen more to people from underrepresented, underprivileged groups, but it happens to a lot of people. So how do you fix that? Well, you go to the manager and you say, all of you now will have a spreadsheet and you're going to keep track of everybody that should be invited. And if you don't invite somebody, you need to fill them in immediately and you need to fix that and we'll hold you accountable for that. And when you do that, you will find that lo and behold, women are benefiting from that. People with disabilities are benefiting from that. But also the white male cisgender heterosexual guy who happens to be an introvert will benefit from that. Or maybe somebody that was at a remote location will benefit from that. So it's really about finding the practices that are creating problems. And when you see them, usually it's like blindingly obvious. We talk about these like giant low-hanging fruit because when you go look at the problems, you find that there are always really stupid, really silly problems that are created in the company. And all they have to do, you don't have to hire a McKinsey and spend millions of dollars to have them figure out what to do. You can just simply say, okay, let's improve the way that we organize the meetings. Let's make sure it's not always the same people that are taking notes. Let's make sure that we're not always assigning the best clients to the same little clique of people that look like us, that went to the same schools that we did, etc. Because at the end of the day, when you do your performance evaluations, you'll wonder why these are the same ones that are always performing better, always getting the raises, always getting the bonuses, always getting promoted. And so those kinds of things require a shift in mindset from asking people how they feel to asking people to tell you stories about what happened to them. But instead of doing it the way that a lot of companies do it, which is backwards, measure the feelings and then go ask them to tell stories that match those feelings. Here, we're asking for the experiences and then seeing how they result in very different experiences and feelings in different groups of people.
Well, it's interesting too. You just said that, and like it's always been a pain point for me because that group of people are dissatisfied. Then they're going to go to that group of people and be like, okay, what can we do to make this better? Create some parameter to be more inclusive to that people, but they're not actually looking at the whole picture and how their actions
Correct.
with this particular group may impact the other groups within the organization.
Correct.
And I love everything you're talking about. So like, to me, that's leaders leading leaders, right? When you're talking about setting up meetings, you're changing the parameters of how you do things that actually benefit everybody. I haven't led in over, I don't know, I haven't been a leader, I guess, in over a year and a half. But for me, specifically, what you've identified was something that I've always did to the best of my ability, right? So you're in these corporate worlds. People don't like to look for feedback or these examples that you're asking for because they think that it's going to lead to mass dissent and chaos and it's going to break the culture when in actual fact the culture's already shit. So you like
Exactly.
you know what I mean? So for me as a leader, I always looked at I'm leading adults for one. I want to be transparent with them. Like I'm middle management, so there's very little I can do except advocate for you, make suggestions, and all of those things. But so I always took the stance of being extremely transparent. So if someone came to me and they asked me something, I would like to do this or do that. Okay, let me take that away. I take it away, and then I get a yes or a no. I always went back to them and I thoroughly explained why there was a yes or a no, because I think the why is important.
Yeah.
Like, don't tell an adult who's giving you their time, most often not an adequate enough amount of pay. The answer is no, without giving them rationale.
Yeah.
So I always thought being transparent with them and bringing them to the table, and like I would also say, okay, you know what? I'm like, I was in this meeting and this was posed, and I'm tasked to figure out what I'm going to do. Like, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think?
Yeah.
I always have these conversations. And what I can say to anybody actually listening is my style of leadership and what you're saying resulted in the highest level of buy-in that you get from your people and the highest performing teams with people, job satisfaction, and all of those things. And it really does start with small choices, small changes in how you do things. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Partner today with CK Sims and Poddin My Noggin to get in front of an audience that cares. You will be supporting mental health stories, tales of resilience, and uplifting content, aligning your brand with bringing goodness, authenticity, and kindness front and center. This spot could be yours. Do you have a story of struggle and resilience? One that you want to share with others and possibly help someone through their own struggles? Find the link in the show description and fill out the guest form today.
Welcome back, everybody. Before the break, we were talking to Paolo Gaudiano. Sorry,
that's it.
Author of Measuring Inclusion, Higher Profits, and Happier People Without Guesswork or Backlash. So you had spoken in the book as well about your early days, right? So you are a mathematician and a scientist?
I'm a weirdo, you could say. Yeah.
No, I think science is smart. I'm not a scientific person, but I think I'm very interested in that kind of stuff.
No, and actually, like, to me, being a little bit weird is actually a compliment. But my background is it's funny because now when I look at it in retrospect, it all makes sense, and I see kind of the red thread that goes through my career. But I started, in fact, as a kid, I started, my passion was animals. I wanted to be a marine biologist. And then I fell in love with cars. I was a mechanic for a little bit. I raced motorcycles. I loved anything mechanical. And I was one of those kids that could fix virtually anything. So then I started to go toward engineering, and I ended up taking, my degree was in applied mathematics, which was a way of essentially studying a lot of different kinds of engineering, but I always loved math. So that was my undergraduate. At the end of my undergraduate, I took a course that was taught in the engineering department, and it was about how the brain works from an engineer perspective. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is like so much more interesting than anything else that I've done. And I was fortunate to get an offer to become a master's student with a professor that was studying neural networks, which at the time was pretty new. It was in the mid 80s. And so it was in the aerospace department. So I was able to do my master's in aerospace engineering and work on the brain. And so I joke with people, my PhD was in computational neuroscience. I joke with people that have done both rocket science and brain surgery, which is actually true. I've done a little bit of both. But all of that boiled down to understanding the link between an individual and the collective. So how does the behavior of an individual influence the collective, and how does the behavior of the collective influence the individual? And that can be very vague. It could be drivers on a highway, soldiers on a battlefield, fish in a school of fish, or it could be people in a company. And I spent, first I spent about 10 years as a professor after doing my PhD studying how neurons in the brain can combine to give us the kind of amazing capabilities that we have, even though individually neurons are really, really crappy little sensors and devices, right? But somehow you put together billions of them and you get these incredible things. And I then left academia, and I was very fortunate. A friend of mine has started a company in which we used a similar idea of using these computer simulations to study social systems. So we started to work for very large companies where we would solve complex problems that range from marketing analytics, planning. A lot of it ended up being in people management. And so the theme of linking the individual to the collective has been a kind of a permanent theme throughout all of my studies and all of my career. And then they culminated 10 years ago when I had this light bulb moment when I was thinking about, being personally interested in diversity and inclusion, but thinking, I'm a white dude, what can I possibly do? I'm not an activist. And then as I was contemplating the stark difference between the experiences that people shared as a function of their skin color, of their gender, of their sexual orientation, of their disabilities, and then those were very detailed. And when it came to solutions, it was like, oh, we need to change the hearts and minds of corporate America. We need to dismantle structural racism. And as I sat there contemplating, how do you close that gap? The light bulb went off, and I thought, this is exactly what I've been doing. And at that point, I've been doing it already for about 25 years between academia and the private sector. So I got all excited about it, started building these computer simulations, proved to myself that I was onto something really tangible. And then with time, I also realized that as a white man with all the privilege in the world, I also have a unique role in the sense that I've had a lot of business experience. Because of my privilege, I can go into any room full of C-suite executives, even if they're all male, Ivy League kind of people, and they will recognize me as one of their own. And they will assume that anything that I'm saying, oh my God, this guy's so smart, he's got a PhD, he's given a TED talk and all this stuff. And so I use that privilege a lot. It allows me to act as an interface between what unfortunately have been two very disparate worlds that often talk at cross purposes. One talks about meaning and justice and fairness, and the other one talks about profits and accounting and things of that sort. And I've learned to connect those two. So I'm very happy of how my multifaceted experience, being in academia, being in business, being an entrepreneur, being a consultant, and my variety of disciplines, math, computer science, engineering, neuroscience, all eventually led me, and social sciences all eventually converge into what I'm doing right now. So it's very, I feel so fortunate. Like every day I get up and I'm like, I am so glad to be working in this space. Right now, working in DI, a little sketchy. And I have to say, we're seeing some slowdowns, but the good news is that I'm getting invited to speak a lot because of the fact that our approach is so unique and because it does avoid the backlash. But anyway, so I'm very, very fortunate that my strange background led me to where I am today.
Well, I think that what I love about everything that you just said was just so much, and also so impressive, right? Just your career alone is very impressive. What I love about all of that, though, is that you, in this current time, which is a movement, are using your privilege and can use your privilege to actually shed light on this from a different angle. And I think that that's what you've done is brilliant in the sense that you have just changed the whole concept of in the end, we're going to still achieve the feelings of inclusivity and diversity and equity. We're still going to achieve these things, but now the approach is going to speak to the predominant white cisgender male C-suite individuals that you can actually quantify profits
exactly
this way. And you mentioned, it's something that I find really interesting too, because you've mentioned several times in the book about white cisgender males,
right?
But you also mentioned as well that this is not about shrinking their space.
Correct.
Right. And I think that that's one of those moments where I get the compulsion to just like grab someone and shake them. Like, do you know what I'm talking about? Like, I'm like, like we're not shrinking your space here. We're just making more space for everybody. We're creating space for everybody to be and to have access and to have the opportunity. One of the things that I wanted to ask, that I have to go check my notes. Can we talk about real quick the 4 M's of measuring inclusion?
The measuring inclusion, you mean like the various steps that I talk about?
Yes.
So I mean, basically, when we measure inclusion, the way that we do that is to think about, we ask people first I introduce some of these ideas. We typically do workshops, and then during the workshop, we point people to a platform where they can anonymously and without us being able to trace them, they can share some identity information if they choose to do so. But what we ask them to do is to share experiences, of things that have happened to them in the workplace. And then we give them a list of categories. And those are the categories that I mentioned in passing earlier, like compensation and benefits, work-life balance, recognition and appreciation, and so on and so forth. We also ask them about the source. We want to know, why did this happen? Was it because of a company policy? Was it because of your leadership, your direct manager, your peers, your customers? And the idea there is that, and I talk in the book, I'm sure you've noticed the analogy with health, where I say, look, it's a little bit like, if you think of from the point of view of a company, not being inclusive is almost like a form of illness. You want to find out, well, what kind of symptoms do you have? Is it a respiratory problem? Is it a muscular problem? Is it a digestive problem? And then if you say, oh, my stomach hurts, okay, it's digestive. Well, what happened? Did you eat something not good, right? So you want to know the symptoms and you want to know the source. So that's really what we do. We basically collect data, and by having the combination of the experiences that are descriptive and qualitative, and then having the quantitative data in terms of the categories, the sources. We also ask about frequency, like, is this something that happens regularly or only happen once? We get quantitative data. So the way that we do it is that we first look at the quantitative data, which points in the direction of where are your biggest problem areas. Maybe respect, which happens to be a category that is always the biggest problem for virtually every company that we've worked with, almost all companies. Or maybe the problem is with compensation. And then by looking at the details of the experiences and looking for clusters of experiences, we can go back and say, oh, the reason why a lot of people are complaining about compensation is that many people complain that their manager is not giving them timely performance reviews, or that the performance reviews are done in a very casual way, right? So when you see that, it's that combination of start with the biggest problems. So instead of bucketing people, we bucket experiences, which is a crucial way of avoiding that problem that you said you wanted to shake people for, which is that it's unavoidable. If you go to any group, not just white people, if you go to any group and you say, oh, we need to do something to help this other group, it's very natural that you're going to assume that that means that you're going to do something negative for me. It's very hard to argue, oh, the pie is magically going to grow, so don't worry for increasing the percentage of women from 20% to 30%. Don't worry, because that does not mean that we reduce men by 10%. Well, it doesn't mean that. Unless you can prove to me that you're going to double the size of the company, means that you're going to be eliminating white men in order to accommodate more women and more people of color, right? And so I try to avoid all of that completely. And in fact, we can measure data without even any identity information at all. The main reason we collect identity data is because companies want to know. They want to know, what is the experience of Black people? What is the experience of people with disabilities? And what we point out to them is that it is rarely the case. I mean, there are some experiences that are unique to certain groups. For example, Black women, who I happen to think is one of the most amazing demographic groups in this country. They put up with all kinds of things in personal life and professional life. And I know what I honestly think some of the best people on the planet that I know are all Black women. But there are things that happen to them that don't happen to anybody else, like somebody wanting to touch their hair, right? I mean, that's something that is not really, it's not cool, let's put it that way, and it creates a lot of stress. However, what I tell people is the following. While it's true that some experiences are unique to certain groups, if people in your company have the kind of mindset that thinks that it's okay to go and touch a Black woman's hair, they're probably also making jokes about people with disabilities and making jokes about people who are gay. And they're, so it's more about it's an indication of a lack of respect. So what I recommend to people is that instead of starting with the identity, fixing the problem for one identity and assuming and hoping that it will benefit others, I say exactly the opposite. Find the biggest problems, fix those problems, and you're most likely to have the most positive impact on the groups that have been the most excluded. Then find the next problem and the next problem and the next problem. And if you go to people and you say, we have a problem with the way that we organize meetings, or we have a problem with the way that we do our performance reviews, and you don't say, we have a problem with the way that we do performance reviews of Black women, it's going to be taken very differently. People are like, oh yeah, I had a situation in which my manager asked me some really stupid questions, or he was too busy and he was on his phone while we were doing a performance review. So everybody can get behind those ideas. And that's why I'm so eager to just focus on, again, let's focus on the experiences, let's bucket them into problems, let's measure them, and then let's use that knowledge to fix the problems with the understanding and the knowledge that it will benefit everybody, but especially the most underappreciated people.
So measure experiences, put them in the categories, address those issues, but not based off identity.
Correct. Essentially, the qualitative data and the quantitative data together tell you where are the biggest problems, the biggest opportunities. And by the way, as I talk about in the book, the level of inclusion of a company is directly relatable to its finances. Because if you have groups of people that are less included, what's going to happen? They're going to be less satisfied, which means that they will produce less money, they'll produce less, so they're making less money for you, and they're more likely to leave, which means that your cost of rehiring people will be higher. So if you have a company in which, let's say, you have 1,000 women, and their satisfaction is low, such that their retention rate is 10% lower than it is for men, and you have 1,000 women, that means that you're losing 100 women a year that you should not be losing if only they had the same experiences as men. Now,
Yeah.
the average in the industry is that it costs you roughly 1 year's worth of salary to replace a departing employee. So if your average salary is $100,000 per employee, you've thrown out the window $10 million a year just by virtue of the fact that you're not treating women the same way that you treat men. So what you do when you measure it is you say, okay, I have this problem. It's respect. It impacts 28% of my women, 33% of my women, and it also impacts 10% of my men and everything else. And then you can go in and you can say, okay, let's find this problem, fix it. It has the potential to save me $5 million a year, and it will benefit all these groups. So it's a completely different way to think about it. It's really the reverse, start with the problem, bucket the problems, not the people.
There was another thing that you had said. I made a note. Give me a second that I really like. Where did it go? So don't chase diversity. So this is what we're talking about right now. So don't
Correct.
chase diversity. Build inclusion, and diversity will follow.
Absolutely. Diversity is what you get, inclusion is what you do, or the other way, inclusion is what you do, diversity is what you get. And in the book, I talk about these computer simulations, which in the book you can see a picture, but not the video. But when I speak, I show these computer simulations where you literally see people advancing through the company, and you see how treating groups of people differently will lead to changes in the level of diversity in a way that matches exactly what we see in the real world. So absolutely, inclusion is what you do, diversity is what you get.
Love that. So my show is about amplifying voices, right? And creating a community. So your work around inclusion and shared access resonates with me. How can media creators like myself help model inclusion in spaces we curate?
It's a little bit tricky to come up with kind of universal findings. And I found that, unfortunately, one of the reasons why DI has been less able to generate results is because people think that because something worked in one company will work in another company or in one organization. Right. And the problem is that organizations are like ecosystems, and things that work for one will not work for the other. The conditions have to be just so. So I'm usually reluctant to make specific recommendations for something like, and I can't say that I really understand the content space very well, but I would say my recommendation would be, don't focus on diversity, meaning I hear so many people go, oh, we need to make sure that our ad has to be inclusive, that it has to have this group of people, that group of people. Resist that temptation and try to identify, to the best of your abilities, what are some actual behaviors that I'm doing or actions that I'm taking that may create biases. And sometimes we do things without realizing it, like where you advertise to try to get your speakers, or what events you may go to. Those are things where you may recognize that, oh, gee, I didn't realize that by going to this particular event that happens to be in an area where the vast majority of people will be members of the normative majority, as I think of them, right? Well, maybe next time I should go to a different place. Like, I remember people that were in New York when I was an entrepreneur. I mean, I still am, but people complaining about how difficult it is to find good technical talent. And they would go to Columbia and NYU, and that was it. And I'm like, look, or maybe Cornell Tech, right? And I'm like, there are dozens and dozens of universities in New York. I was an adjunct at City College of New York, which used to be called the Harvard of the poor. And people who graduated with computer science degrees from City College of New York only had roughly a 55% job placement success, whereas Columbia University graduates had like a 98%. And so I always tell people, it's like, why don't you just go like those 30 extra blocks to go from Columbia University to City College and go talk to these people? Who are people who, by the way, maybe their GPAs are not as stellar, maybe they don't come from an Ivy League, but these are people that are working full-time, raising a family, and getting a master's degree in computer science. And maybe their GPA is only 3.4, but you know what? I'll take that kind of person any day if I want to build a successful team, right? Well, and so maybe in your space, kind of similar, like think more about, what am I doing that is potentially excluding people inadvertently, as opposed to let me go out of my way to try to force inclusion or force diversity of different people.
Love that answer. And I love that sentiment as well when it comes to I will take either someone who has the right attitude and drive over someone who's the most educated. Because someone who has the right attitude and the right drive, regardless of their socioeconomic status or what school they went to or whatever the situation is, given the right opportunity, they will blow your mind.
Yeah. Given the right opportunity is a big caveat, right? I mean, you have to create an environment where they can succeed. And unfortunately, that happens a lot. You go out of your way, you hire these people, and then you throw them into an environment where they're unwelcome, they're unsupported, they're unappreciated. And then you wonder why they're not doing so well. It's like, well, you basically stack the odds against them. And then unfortunately that turns into, oh, see, we tried it with those people, but it didn't work out. Yeah. And so it creates this very vicious cycle, right? And then not only that, but then when you start to impose targets or quotas, then the white men get pissed off. And they have every reason. Like if I was a white guy, we hear a lot of people, it's like, hey, I was supposed to get promoted last month, but the HR department told me they couldn't promote me because they had to promote a woman and a black person before they promoted me. That is not right. That's not a correct way to do diversity, equity, and inclusion. But unfortunately, too many companies, because they only look at diversity, that's what they do. And you read in my book, I'd like to joke about the thermostat example where I say, well, if I walked into my house in the middle of winter and it felt very cold, I look at the thermostat, it reads 50 degrees. How do I fix that? I light a match under the thermostat. And look, now it reads 90 degrees. But meanwhile, the windows are drafty, the front door is open, and the roof is leaking. And you might burn the house down, which is exactly what has happened with DEI. We focus so much on lighting that match under the thermostat, just stuffing more diverse people into unwelcoming environment, that now it's blowing up in our face. And now all of a sudden, the president of the United States of America says that all DEI is illegal. And it's like, well, I hate to tell you, but I literally predicted this 7 years ago, right? So, and to me,
DEI, as he understands it, is illegal, should be illegal. Because this way that you're talking about, passing over someone who by merit should have gotten that promotion just because you have an arbitrary number to fill. What the hell is that?
Agreed.
The right person gets the job. It doesn't matter.
Agreed.
But you have the people making those decisions also have to understand their bias.
Absolutely.
So that right person cannot necessarily just be the person who looks like you from the same school.
Yes, and like a sneak preview of some of the stuff that I'm working on right now is that people talk about meritocracies and merit, and people that are against it complain about the fact that meritocracy often leads to biases because then you promote the people that you think deserve it. And what I've been writing some things and working on a book, and one of the things we talk about the fact that merit itself is a valuable idea, but you need to measure it. You actually need to measure it. And it's not just about recognizing that you may have biases, because recognizing that you have biases pins the guilt on it or the blame on individuals. And I'm a big fan of the fact that, look, individual biases are unavoidable and they're relatively harmless as long as the organization has mechanisms that prevents those biases from hurting a lot of people. So if you're biased in the way that you promote people, as long as I have a metric that measures how you're promoting people and can keep an eye on it and notice if something is awry and figure out how to fix it, it's okay. The problem is when those processes are not there. So one of the things that I'm working on is what I call the MIND framework, which stands for measuring inclusion and merit for efficiency. So you can see I'm paying lip service to the Elon Musks and Donald Trumps of the world to say, look, if you're gonna tell me that you want a meritocracy, that you want efficient companies, don't just, pardon the crass expression, don't just blow smoke up my ass. Actually do something. Show me that you're measuring that. Because if you're not measuring that, it's just an ideology. Meritocracy, the way that it's done today, is an ideology. And until they put numbers on it,
we're going political, which is interesting. But the truth of the matter is, to Elon Musk, to Donald Trump, meritocracy is white people that look like them getting the job. As far as I'm concerned, that is what their understanding of what it is. Yeah. Their understanding of DEI is warped, right? Well. They've made it evil or all those things. It's not evil. However, this book can help you thoroughly understand how to measure inclusion and how it can, in fact, actually lead to higher profits.
Yeah.
Like it's science. y'all. It's not opinion. Paulo didn't spend a lifetime writing an opinion piece.
Right.
He created data models and he has the science behind it. So you own, oh, I know I made the note, but see, when I make a lot of notes and I get lost. Alera?
Alaria, yeah.
Alaria. Alaria.tech, I believe, is the
Correct.
website, right?
Alaria
So
Tech.
is this your consulting firm in the sense that if somebody wanted to set up services with you to sort of put together some of these frameworks for their business or suggest it to their leadership at their business, that's how they would go about
Right.
doing it?
Alaria.tech, so ALERIA.tech. Yes, that's the best way. It's my company. We're trying to be more of a product company. We do have a product. We have a set of tools to measure inclusion, to analyze it. We have a beautiful dashboard that we created. We have a calculator that calculates how much money you're losing because of poor levels of inclusion. But these days, we're getting a ton of requests for leadership training, management training, just going in and talking people off the ledge, helping them to figure out how do I, change the wording but make sure they're still doing the right thing. So in reality, we do a lot of consulting, a lot of services because people need that. But it's all grounded in a very strong kind of quantitative technology foundation. Yeah.
Well, if you're ever needing somebody, because that's what I do, I'm a consultant, I would love to get involved because to me, this is the answer in my brain to the DEI, right? I'm all for having our organizations look like the world as we see it, right? Function as the world as we see it. You're right in the sense that every organization is its own ecosystem.
Yeah.
Absolutely, without question. Not just because you can do one thing here doesn't mean it's lift and shift at another organization. So for anybody who's interested, go to Illyria.tech. And so Illyria, I will tell you, and this is me being a geek. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the show Angel.
I'm not.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh, yeah.
And Angel.
Yes.
Okay, so Winifred Burkle in that show turned into a god at the end of the series, and her name was Illyria.
Oh, I missed that. Okay.
Yeah, and so what can you tell me where Illyria came from?
So Alaria was very interesting. When I first started to think about doing this, I worked with a woman, Ellen Hunt, who was very, very helpful in some of the early stages of ideas. And she was actually the one that came up with the name, in the sense that, we were looking, and I forget, it's possible that that's where she saw it from originally. But then we read somewhere there was a legend about an eagle called Alaria. And we liked the idea of an eagle, kind of a female symbol, strength, the ability to see from far away. And so we use that name, and it starts with an A, which I think is always a good idea to have a company that starts with an A. And then we used as our logo this kind of sort of iconified this. It's like an eagle, but it's in a very, very stylized way. And so that's how the name came about. It was really just when we started discussing, it was like, wow, that sounds like a really cool name, and it stuck. And instead of trying to come up with a name that explains what we do, we're like, let's just use a name that is cool and that most people can read and pronounce and remember, and that's how it worked out.
Well, you have achieved that because I think Illyria is a very cool name.
Thank you.
And has like a certain air to it. If you want to think about like air, so all right. So if you want to get some of the tools that Paolo and his team have built, go to Illyria.tech. You can purchase the book online anywhere, in bookstores as well.
Not much in physical bookstores, but definitely online. Any online reseller you'll find it.
Okay, perfect. Definitely worth the read, y'all. Especially if you, and just to be clear, this is not just for people who are in business or in leadership, or like anybody could take away something from this book. And you use lots of analogies throughout, which I really enjoyed. And one of the things that I liked about this book is that it's written in such a way that anybody with such a vast understanding or capacity could understand the concepts that are presented and can take away from that. So well done on the book. I'm hoping that we see you do lots of great work continually because we need it. Maybe you can go meet with Mr. President and actually discuss how you could implement measuring inclusion in the federal government.
I would love to do that. I honestly, I've actually given a talk at a university in a class that was in kind of an anti-DI class about woke ideology, and they all loved it. Once we got past it's about acknowledging mistakes that we've made and acknowledging that ultimately we all want the same thing. We want to be able to get a job that we're qualified for. We want to be able to advance in that job, get paid fairly for the work that we do, and not feel miserable. And and who's going to disagree with that?
Well, some people might, but hopefully they won't. But anyway, thank you so much for being here, for discussing your book. Thank you again for the copy. And I wish you the very best. And for everybody at home, until next time, get out there and live your wildest dreams.
For media and sponsorship inquiries, email info@cksims.com or visit cksims.com and fill out the contact form. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. A new episode airs every Saturday. CKS Media.